My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Llegó el evento de grandes marcas de JCPenney, con ahorros en las marcas favoritas para ti y tu familia, como Levi's con 30% de descuento en línea o compra uno y recibe otro con 50% en la tienda. Encuentra más ahorros como 25% en Adidas y hasta 50% en ropa Carter's para bebés y niños. Más marcas, grandes ahorros. JCPenney, vale la pena. Ofertas válidas del 23 al 29 de septiembre en selección de estilos. Se excluye de los cupones. Aplican condiciones y exclusiones. Detalles en la tienda jcp.com.
The schedule is here. Hey, Duke fans, welcome to episode 648 of the DBR podcast, the Duke Basketball Roundup. I'm Jason Evans, joined by my buddy Donald Wine. It is just a couple minutes before 9:30. About an hour and a half ago, the schedule was released, the entire Duke schedule, not the non-con, but the whole thing, including the ACC contests. This is a special time of year, Donald. I feel like, we've been in this barren wasteland. We haven't had a lot of recruiting news lately, or really at all over the summer. We've been in this time. We haven't gotten a lot of video from practices and stuff, from scrimmages. We've been thirsting for a little nugget of information about what the coming season is going to bring. And we got it in spades just a short time ago, didn't we?
Yeah, we got the men's schedule. We got the women's schedule. I have notes on everything. The ACC, as we all know, is 18 teams, and there are some interesting quirks, not just about Duke's schedule, but about some of the other schedules in the ACC that I think people need to pay attention to. But it's great to do this because, look, there was nothing to do on this Tuesday night except just kind of watch. I think I'm watching The Town for the 600th time. So we can talk basketball all night because this was the dominant thing that happened, and I'm so excited that we finally have a full schedule.
Exactly. All right, so we're going to dive into it here. Lots to get to. I'm going to start with this, Donald. The thing I always look for are the tough turnarounds. Those Saturday, Monday games, or those games that are otherwise like stacked back to back against the good teams. Now, the way to know whether it's a tough turnaround is both timing and who you're playing. So the first thing I did was I looked and I tried to separate out the really good teams in the ACC from the guys who probably are going to be at the best in the middle, if not in the bottom half. And just so folks know, I looked at like Bart Torvik's preseason rankings. I've looked at some other kind of stuff. I've been tracking teams a bit myself. Here is my list. Here are the teams that I think are the contenders, so to speak. The teams that are likely to be in the top half of the ACC this year. Duke is number one. UNC, Miami, Louisville, Wake, Clemson, Pitt, Virginia, and then like maybe SMU and NC State. I've got like right there, hovering. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then Duke makes 9. So that's 9 teams. That's the top half of the conference, in my opinion. I'm not saying that someone else can't rise up, that who knows who, a Virginia Tech or whatever, someone rises up above some of those teams. I'm not projecting it exactly, but those were the teams I was sort of looking for to say, hey, do we have like back-to-backs involving those teams? UNC, Miami, do we play Miami and Wake back, that kind of thing? For the most part, I think we avoided it. For the most part, I didn't see a lot of back-to-backs where I go, wow, that's a tough turnaround. Probably the toughest one is like Wake and then North Carolina, something like that. I didn't see a lot that scares me terribly, but I did want to point something out. Because the conference is now expanded, because we now have 18 teams in the ACC, there are a lot fewer teams that you play twice. It used to be you played like 5 or 6 teams.
You played 5 teams twice, and now it's down to 3.
Right. Only playing 3 teams twice. Here are the 3 teams that Duke plays twice: UNC, Miami, and Wake Forest. Well, I'm not sure if you recall when I was listing the top teams in the ACC.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the next 4 teams after Duke are UNC, Miami, Wake Forest, and Louisville. How did we get 3 of the 4 non-Duke top Duke teams in the conference as the teams were playing twice? Bart Torvik says the Duke plays the number 2, number 3, and number 4 teams twice. How there's no justice here, is there?
So we talked about this, it feels like a year ago, but I think it was maybe like 6-7 months ago. The way they set it up is that the ACC is every team in the ACC has 2 rivals, right? They have 2 rivals who they're always going to play twice. And then there's a third team that they'll play twice that rotates every year. Our 2 rivals are obviously UNC, and the other one is Wake Forest. And then it just so happened that Miami was the rotational pick for this year. And I think that, yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And Jason, I'm glad you started with the Saturday, Monday games, because Duke has 3.
Give it to me. You looked into this.
Duke has 3 of them. 3 Saturday, Monday doubles is what, we always call them double headers, but they're Saturday, Monday doubles. January 25th and 27th, they're at Wake Forest and then home against NC State. February 15th and February 17th, they're home against Stanford, and then they take the road to go to Virginia. Then March 1st and March 3rd, they are at home to FSU, at home to Wake Forest. Now, Jason, the
really quick, Donald. Hey, really quick. I do like that none of those are away. There's a home game involved in them. In 2 of the 3 of them, the home game is the Monday game. There's not travel there for Monday. And frankly, UVA is not a brutal travel one. I mean, if you're going to BC, going to Miami, if you're going out to the West Coast to SMU or even Notre Dame, I mean, but going to Virginia, it's easier travel. So I think all of those, I know you're going to get into how many of them there are, but in terms of how they set up, I think it's not that bad. And by the way, home against FSU, home against Wake, I'm going to try and come in town for those 2 games.
Yeah. So the thing about it is, one, we'll talk about the UNC game in a second, but the UNC game at home, or the one that's in February, is not one of these Saturday, Monday doubles. And that has been the case the past couple of years, that has been the start of a Saturday, Monday double, is that game against UNC, whether it was home or away. But Jason, the reason why I bring up the Saturday, Monday doubles is that I mentioned Duke has 3 of them. There is one team in the ACC that has 3 Saturday, Monday games. I just mentioned it. It's Duke University. 2 teams, UNC and UVA, have 2 Saturday, Monday doubles. Clemson, who you mentioned them as one of your top 8. Clemson has 1 Saturday, Monday double. Duke at home, UNC at home. That is the only one they have. So they get to face the 2 best teams of the ACC in the span of 3 days. Some people may call that tough.
By the way,
I think that's favorable.
A tough double, my friend.
It's a tough double, but it's a favorable one. Louisville, one of the teams that you have said all summer long has been one of those teams that people expect to be among the top teams in the ACC, has 0 Saturday, Monday doubles. They also have Duke at home, UNC at home, Clemson at home, and Miami at home. You mentioned all those teams. So they have a pretty favorable schedule too. Jason, the thing about the Saturday, Monday doubles is it used to be kind of equitable in the sense that everybody had one. Louisville, Miami, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, SMU, Cal, Stanford, and Georgia Tech. I just mentioned half of the ACC. Half the ACC does not have a Saturday, Monday double. And I think that's interesting that Duke has 3, and they're the only team that has 3, while half the ACC does not have one. And I think that's interesting how they set it up. In fact, there's really only a few Mondays that even have games on the calendar. And it's not like there's every Monday that they're going to have it. They've kind of spaced this out and made Tuesdays their main night along with Saturdays.
Hey, so let me ask you, do you think this Duke schedule is tough, middle of the road, or easy?
I think that's an interesting question. I think it's middle of the road in some parts, and I think it's interesting. I keep saying the word interesting, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say that a lot because, again, it's only been an hour, and some of these things I'm still trying to rack in my brain what they're coming up with. Remember when when people were like, oh, well, Duke doesn't really, they have some tough teams in the non-conference schedule, but they only hit the road once. They go to Arizona. Well, our first 2 ACC games are on the road. There's the December 8th game at Louisville to start the ACC season. And then on December 21st, they go to Georgia Tech, which last time we did Georgia Tech was the opener, if you remember, that early December game where we lost.
I remember.
You were there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you'll be at this one because it's right before the holiday season. And I find it fascinating that Duke got 2 road games to start. So now you look at that November, December schedule and you go, wow, Duke has a lot of tough games and they have some road contests. They got to take the road a lot. There's going to be a lot of travel, whether it's neutral site or again, at somebody else's gym. And so that makes the January portion of the schedule a little, like, in my mind, a little lopsidedly weak. And the reason why I say that is because there really is only 2 road games in all of January where they have to leave the state of North Carolina. That's going to SMU and going to Boston College. They go to Wake Forest as part of that Saturday, Monday double, but again, that's a bus trip. So they get to stay at home for almost all of January. And then February, there's a little bit of bounce back and forth. So again, they're including the Illinois game on February 22nd at Madison Square Garden, which is a home away from home, but still an out-of-conference game in a neutral site away from the confines of Cameron Indoor Stadium. So yeah, I think this schedule has some quirky parts, but I think, January, what I call the dog days of the ACC season, it did us a favor in a way. We get to stay at home for most of it.
Okay, so you said you think it's middle of the road. Bart Torvik is able to project how Duke's ACC schedule compares to everyone else. He ranks all the schedules in the conference based on who you're playing, home and away, all other kind of stuff. And he's already programmed the numbers and put them into his computer to tell you, who has the easy schedule and who has the tough one. And I'm going to tell you right now that he projects Duke with the 4th toughest conference schedule, 4th toughest, which is quite a feat considering the best team in the ACC is Duke, and we never play Duke. We got lucky, Donald. We never play the top team in the ACC.
Correct. We can't.
It is right. It is quite something that the best team in the conference ends up with a 4th toughest schedule. The only teams who have tougher schedules than Duke are Virginia Tech, Florida State, and BC. The easiest schedule in the conference, according to Torvik, goes to Notre Dame, then Clemson, then SMU. I'm telling you, Clemson and SMU, 2 teams that I mentioned earlier that I think could be in that top half, super easy schedules. You could see those 2 teams rise up a bit in the standings because of that really easy slate. And the last thing I want to say about that is it seems like every damn year the Virginia Cavaliers have an easy ACC schedule. I don't know who they're bribing. I don't know, what angel in heaven is providing them with special scheduling bonuses every year, but every damn season, the Virginia Cavaliers seem to have an easy ACC schedule. It happened again this year. Torvik rates their schedule 13th toughest in the league, not quite like 16th, 17th, 18th, the way you have with Clemson and SMU, but an easy schedule for Virginia again, year after year. I don't know how they do it.
It's, again, some of these schedules and there just hasn't been enough time to break down all of them. If there was 15 teams, I still wouldn't have had enough time between the end of that show, the introduction show, and the one we recorded. There's just too many teams in the ACC to break everything down initially. But what I will say about UVA is this: they are one of the 2 teams that I mentioned that has 2 Saturday, Monday doubles. And I look at that. I also look at the fact that they always come in and it always feels like they're under the radar because, Jason, I don't know why, and we've talked about this from time to time, every one of their games feels like a boring game, right? Like, because it's just the way they play. Yeah. Every game, like, yeah, they may have a middle of the road schedule, but they're all going to be, it feels like they're all going to be 50 to 48, contests. And there's not a lot of action between those 2 teams or Virginia and whoever they play. I think it's an interesting game for us when we go to Virginia on on February 17th, because we will have just had the Cal teams, the Bay Area teams come to town over the week. We then do UVA and then at Madison Square Garden for Illinois. So it's one of those games where and it's on a Monday, right? So we're catching them on that Monday, and I think they play at home before. So I'm looking at the schedule and I'm saying, yeah, all the teams that we got to beat, sure, they may have weaker schedules than us, but also this is what we asked for essentially when we planned the schedule that we did with this particular team that we have coming in, which I know we'll talk about, way more. But now that we know what this team is going to be, right? We have our guys' place. we've been talking about the competition factor. They will have no days off in this schedule. And the great thing is they will have a whole slate in January where they'll have to defend Cameron. They will have a whole slate in February where they kind of go back and forth between games, and they'll have to see teams on the road. So I'm curious to see how this team responds, and if there is like a dull period where they kind of get rusty, where is that going to be? There's not a lot of breaks. Even in December, there's not a lot of big breaks for this Duke team.
I got just a couple more notes about the Duke schedule. One really quick thing. We've already talked about the fact that Duke plays Louisville on December 8th at Louisville to kick off the schedule. I kind of hate the fact that we play them as the very first ACC game and then don't face them again all season, because Louisville is one of the more interesting teams in the conference. They are a team that is fairly likely to be way up there in the standings. And, we get them on December 8th and then we're done with them. Couldn't they have maybe given us like the Wake or the Miami game in that spot really early?
I was going to say, it should be a team that the first game of the ACC should be, if you're doing it in December, you should have it as one of the teams that you're going to see later on the season. Exactly. So you're just like, because you remember, I think it was Georgia Tech we did see later in the season, right? Right. So they were able to do it.
It ended up being the second game ended up being closer than people thought it was going to be. They thought that Duke was going to come out and spank them because we were so mad at them. But
right. And then we also had Pitt in early January at home. And a week later we saw them, or I'm sorry, we were on the road at Pitt. And then a week later they came to Cameron. And then we didn't see them the rest of the season. Yeah. So I think again, and I always say this every year, there has to be a couple of teams who the series is done with them before February, because we have UNC who we haven't yet played, and we face them twice, right? Once in February, once in March. And so I understand that part, but yeah, I agree with you. I think, Miami and Wake at that first game in December, whether it's on the road or at home, wouldn't have changed the schedule that much, and you get to see a Louisville team who actually might be better as the year gets along. We might get to see them, but again, that may play into our hands if we beat them early, right? And they improve as the season goes along. That win looks better for us when they come time for seeding for the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, except I think this Duke team, especially as young as it is probably going to peak later rather than earlier. But regardless, there are two other things I wanted to note really quick. Two stretches that I think people are worth noticing. I think our toughest stretch, there's a 3-game stretch that to me is the most difficult part of this schedule. And it's of our own making that it's difficult, because it includes that Illinois game in New York that, functionally is an optional game, so to speak. Obviously we entered into a contract with the Illini and it's a big deal to go to New York every year, but we chose to play it in the middle of the ACC schedule. And most years we're playing that game, sometime in early mid-December. But this stretch where we go at UVA, Illinois, and New York, and then at Miami, that's an 8-game stretch where we're going to be on the road twice, technically on the road 3 times, because that neutral court game, even though, MSG is Duke's home away from home, it's still the team getting on a plane, traveling to an unfamiliar place, dealing with, classes remotely and all that other kind of stuff. Those 3 games in a row to me is a pretty tough stretch. And it's 2 decent to very good ACC teams in road arenas that are going to be rocking, because those are going to be big games for those teams. And then the other stretch I wanted to point out, from January 25th to February 5th, rivalry much. Yeah. We play at Wake. We then have NC State and UNC at home, and then we go to Syracuse. All right. Wake and Syracuse hate Duke. Hate the fans. Those arenas will be packed to the gills with people who are ready to just kill the Blue Devils. I don't need to rehash what happened last year at Wake Forest for anybody. But those 2 road games are always games where the arena is really hot. And then NC State and UNC back-to-back at home. I just see those 4 games. If you ask me to pick who are Duke's biggest rivals in the ACC, obviously UNC. I think NC State is probably next. And Wake and Syracuse are right up there. It's not like there's a BC thrown in there. It's not like there's an SMU, or something like that. Cal. These are 4 games against 4 teams where the rivalry meter is turned up to 11.
So I focused in on just the 3 Tobacco Road teams that I think, on one hand, I think it's awesome that we get to see all the Tobacco Road teams in the span of basically a week, right? That seems like some old school nine team ACC conference basketball, right? So you get at Wake Forest, you get NC State, you get UNC. If you even want to extend it to if you even want to extend it to Syracuse, fine. But if you do that, you have to extend it to also going to Clemson on February 8th, because Clemson, need I remind you, every time we go to Little John, something happens. So whether it's good or bad.
Although I will tell you, as someone who's been to Little John like 3 or 4 times now, probably next to Georgia Tech and Duke, it's the place I've been the most in the ACC. If Duke gets out to a lead, that place goes quiet.
But here's the thing:
rocking. When they play well, it gets rocking. But if they're not playing, Clemson to me is one of the crowds that doesn't lift their team. The team lifts the crowd, and to me that's a big difference.
Yeah, but remember, that is a huge weekend for them because, as I mentioned, it's their only Saturday, Monday double, and it is Duke and UNC both coming to town. I don't think anyone's going to need any help getting jacked up for those 2 games. So, but again, I focus on that Tobacco Road week because I think that's one. It's always a game that's going to be trippy, right? Those games are always trippy. Anything can happen in any of those games against either of those teams. We're playing in NC State at home. I think that's better than going to Raleigh. I'll take that. But again, Lawrence Joel is a powder keg whenever we go there. And then we have UNC. But I think also, again, it's just really special. You don't see that often where we get to see all 3 of our Tobacco Road neighbors in the span of 3 games, whether it's a week, whether it's 5 days. And I really love that they put that in there in the middle of the season. You know, symbolism's out here. The middle of the ACC is North Carolina. The middle of the ACC schedule for Duke, we have to play the state of North Carolina.
I love it. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side, a few more notes about the rest of the ACC. A quick note about the timing of the schedule, and we're also going to discuss the Duke women's schedule, a team with high expectations this year. All of that coming at you after the break.
With the Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply.
Donald, we're back from the break. I know you've done a good deep dive on the Duke women. We're going to get to it in a minute, but I got a couple things I wanted to mention just before we go about the rest of the ACC. And I want to start with this, and then I'll let you've done more looking at the rest of the ACC than I have. I wanted to note something because I've had some friends, I've had some people email me, some people ask me, why is the schedule getting released so late? We're sitting here on September 24th, and they're like, what is going on that we're getting the schedule so late in September? So I went ahead and I looked. Last year, schedule was released on September 26th, the 4th Tuesday of the month, just like this year. September 24th, 4th Tuesday of the month last year, September 26th, the 4th Tuesday of the month. But prior to that, it had always been way earlier. In 2022, 2021, 2019, and 2018, it was on either September 13th or 16th every year. So if you've been antsy, if you've been feeling like, where's the schedule been? They've moved things back. It is being released now about 10 days or so later, 10 plus days later than it used to be. And it does bug me a little bit, man. Give me something to talk about in early September, guys, you know? But I did want to remind folks of one thing. As I was looking back over time and trying to find when the schedule had been released every year, in 2021, the schedule was released on November 10th. And for a second, I was like, what? And then I went, oh, yeah, there's that pandemic thing going on. And no one knew we were able to play any basketball.
Mm-hmm.
So they had that excuse. So as bad as it feels to be getting on the 24th of September, remember back in 2021, we didn't get it till November 10th.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about that because one, yes, last year it came out again 2 days later. It came out on September 26th, as you mentioned. And yes, while we appreciate, you and I appreciate when it comes out earlier because we get to talk about the schedule for 2 more weeks and break it down, bit by bit. But I also think that there are, again, 3 new teams. We were an all-coast conference now. It's not just the Atlantic coast that is involved in this. And I think they had to do some weird things to make sure this schedule matrix kind of fit. And as we look at some of the other things, the one thing I did want to focus on, Jason, was those three teams, the three debutantes of the ACC, Stanford, Cal, and SMU. It's interesting to me in talking about how they were going to do Cal and Stanford. Cal and Stanford are basically doing where they come to the East Coast for a few games, they go back to the West Coast, they have a couple teams come out, do the same thing. Everyone who goes out to the West Coast plays Stanford and Cal in like a little bracket, basically, in a little bucket. Those two teams back to back. Just like I mentioned, Cal is coming to Durham at the same time as Stanford is. Cal comes first. I think it's Cal comes first, then Stanford, right in the middle of February, right around Valentine's Day. So great lovey thing to have the Bay Area out in Cameron. But I also think it's interesting that they only have one team that is not paired. The road game is not paired with another game. That is when they go to SMU. Both Cal and Stanford go to SMU. Cal actually plays Stanford in a home and home. I'm sorry. Cal actually plays SMU in a home and home. Stanford does not. Stanford only goes to SMU. I think this is the most interesting part about this, Jason. If you're trying to welcome the ACC to Cal and Stanford and vice versa, it's interesting that Cal and Stanford don't get UNC or Duke at home. I figured they would split up who they saw, right? Not just one, but guarantee at least one of those teams come out to the West Coast every year. Instead, they both come to, the triangle to see both teams. And the triangle teams do not, or at least in the case of Duke and UNC, they do not go out there. Stanford does get Duke at home, right? January 4th. I hope to make it down for that. And then right after that, they travel to Chapel Hill to face Carolina on January 7th. So I found that interesting that SMU, it basically is essentially guaranteed to get one of Duke or UNC at home every single year, while the Bay Area teams are not. And I think the first thing I saw on the chatter on ACC Twitter was the Cal and Stanford fan base going, Duke and UNC is not coming out here. What is the schedule? So they're obviously pretty upset that they're not getting those marquee matchups, at least from their point of view.
Well, the one thing I'd say about it is for them, being in the ACC means a whole brand new slate of teams. Mm-hmm. And there's probably an excitement and like I want to get to know these teams kind of thing to that. And then next year they get those two marquee teams. But I do, look, I'm privy to the way other ACC teams sell their ticket packages and the such. Like Georgia Tech every year has a special ticket package, just the biggest opponents. And it either includes Duke or UNC, like virtually every year. So if you're Cal and Stanford and you're like, let's fill up our arena, let's give them a marquee matchup, and you're missing both Duke and UNC, that's kind of like, really?
And the teams that get both Duke and UNC at home, sometimes they even split up their packages even further. They have package A and package that includes B. A. Package B includes UNC, and then the season ticket is the only way you can get both games. So they do it where they can try and get as many ticket sales as possible with that. So I thought that was interesting. And Jason, you mentioned, yes, they're, Cal, Stanford, part of the ACC, brand new slate of teams they have to deal with. Their very first ACC game, they play each other on December. I think it's December 7th. Welcome to the ACC. Same as the old ACC or same as Pac-12, wherever you came from. Yeah,
welcome to the ACC, playing someone you played 150 times before in the past.
Yeah, and again, for the ACC as a whole, I do like that. For Cal and Stanford, I hate it because, again, I want them to be introduced to the ACC by playing an ACC team that was already there, as opposed to and saving that rivalry for, again, later on in the year when we have all of these big rivalries that the ACC hangs their head on. Cal Stanford is going to be one of them, and not just basketball. In almost every sport, Cal Stanford rivalry is going to be one of the premier rivalries of the ACC. Move that to later in the schedule so that you can make it a marquee matchup. But again, in the ACC's eyes, they're saying, hey, we can do that in December and really kick off the ACC slate with that. I don't get it, but I see their vision for it. I just hate it for the two teams to come right in and immediately start by playing the teams that they just came in with.
Yeah, I get you. Hey, let's very quickly get into the women's schedule. I know you've done a look at this. I do want to note one thing for people out there who haven't paid attention. Kara Lawson, I don't want to say it's been a rebuilding task for her, but the Duke program The Duke women's program had fallen off a bit, and Kara Lawson has been steadily climbing each and every season with it. For people who haven't paid attention to the preseason rankings, Duke is in pretty much everybody's preseason top 15. ESPN has Duke at number 11. ESPN's bracketology has the Blue Devils as a number 3 seed in the women's bracketology. I know it's absurd to be sitting here in September talking about bracketology, but I'm just, in terms of preseason expectations, the Duke women's team, you're going to want to pay attention to them. This team is a contender this year, is a definite contender to win the ACC title. So, Donald, you've looked at the schedule a little bit. Tell me some of the things you've noted about what the Duke women face this season.
Well, the ACC, first of all, is arguably the best conference in women's basketball. That we'll start there because, again, they already had Louisville, UNC, NC State, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, all of them super, super good. All of them advancing deep into conference tournaments, into NCAA tournaments. Now they add Stanford to that. Stanford,
yeah,
who,
by the
yes,
way,
they lost Tara Vanderveer, but they are one of the premier women's basketball programs that there is out there.
Yeah, I mentioned that ESPN bracketology, they project 10 ACC teams to make the NCAA tournament for next season. I mean, you could be in the bottom half of the ACC and still be one of the top 64 teams in the country.
Yes. And the thing about the women's schedule is, the idea that, Duke doesn't go on the road often is not present with the women's team because they are going on the road a lot, especially in the early part of their schedule. Hey, hello, Maryland. Welcome back to the program because Maryland is one of the premier games that the Duke women have. They come here to College Park on November 10th. So again, they're renewing that old rivalry. If you remember the 2006 national championship game was Duke versus Maryland. So this is a big one that they're looking forward to. They're at Liberty. They're at South Dakota State. They're at South Carolina for the ACC SEC Challenge, and they're at South Florida. I think that's real tough for this team. And I think Kara Lawson is kind of taking a page out of John Sharp's book and saying, we will step to anyone, anytime, anywhere, because if we want to be viewed as one of the better teams in the country, we got to go out and play them. We got to go play them where they're at, and we got to beat them. And this is a big schedule for them. So I'm really curious to see how they do, especially in the early part. South Carolina is just it's just a beast. So, I mean, if they are able to hang with South Carolina, that is a great thing. But this early conference schedule for them is really tough. I will also say they see the ACC debutantes all in a row. They host Cal on January 16th. They host Stanford on January 19th. And then they travel to SMU on January 23rd. The biggest part about this schedule, Jason, is that for the first time in a very long time, UNC is not the last game. They are not closing with UNC. UNC is not closing with us. We close at Florida State. We play UNC on February 27th and then travel on March 2nd to Tallahassee. I think that is, I don't know what the ACC is doing, but that is still, at least on the women's side, one of the premier matchups in all of women's college basketball. It's become even more kind of important over the years as Duke has started to rebuild this program and as Kara Lawson has started to get to the point last year. It really affected seeding for the ACC tournament in the NCAA tournament. It really affected all that. So I cannot understand for the life of me why they would take that last game away and make it something else. FSU, again, also going to be very good. But I think Duke UNC should always end the season in both men's and women's basketball. It's that tradition that has been built on both sides and both teams. And it's not something that is a men's tradition that the women have taken. They have their own rivalry with UNC that needs to be respected. And somehow the ACC just did not respect it with the schedule. But I will say this schedule was very loaded. This team is very talented. We have a lot of great players coming in. We've talked about Toby Fournier and the fact that she could dunk, but she could do a whole lot more. Jaden Donovan's back. Vanessa DeJesus is back from her injury. There's a lot of people back. I believe one is lost for a season. I'm trying to, it escapes me which player is gone for the season. But this team is going to be stacked, and this team is ready to challenge itself by playing the best of the best. And again, as I mentioned, 5 non-conference games on the road, not counting the tournament that they're playing in Vegas at the same time. The men are there to play Kansas. So, shout out to the women. I hope they do well, and I'm looking forward to some of these games. A lot of these games are going to be marquee matchups on national television, and you do not want to miss them.
Yeah, it's going to be a exciting season for both the men and the women. And I just want to highlight and agree with you. Not ending the season with UNC just feels weird and feels wrong. The end of the women's season already to me is strange because they end their regular season, they play the ACC tournament, and then there's like usually like almost
A week
2
break.
weeks.
Yeah, 2 week break.
Yeah, it's like 2 weeks before the NCAA tournament starts for the women. I know that they've got television issues and all kinds of stuff like that, and all the men's tournaments sort of push them aside, even though last year the women's NCAA tournament was getting bigger ratings than the men's NCAA tournament.
Was a lot better. Yeah.
Yeah. Women's basketball is becoming a juggernaut in terms of sports television ratings. But I've always felt the end of the season for the women was sort of this weirdly anticlimactic thing because of that long break. Well, and then to ruin the biggest rivalry in the ACC, the Duke UNC game, by not putting it as the final game of the season, it does feel weird. It does feel wrong. I'm sure there's some reason that the ACC has for that because it's what they've traditionally done, but that's their
and I'm
decision.
sure it's probably because, again, Stanford coming in, unlike the men, right? The men are not expected to be in the top half of the ACC, but the women are expected to be arguably the best team in the ACC. And maybe it's about highlighting some of those newer rivalries. They'll play Notre Dame, they'll play Virginia Tech, again, they'll play UNC, so they had to maybe spread it around. I don't know, but still, at the end of the day, the ACC is the ACC. In the last Saturday of the regular season, whether it's the men or the women, you want that to be your biggest matchups. You want everyone to be tuning into the ACC network and the ESPN, ESPN2, the CW, whatever channel this game is on, to watch it. And it's even more anticlimactic after everything that you rightfully mentioned with how the schedule works for the women, unfortunately. But it's even more anticlimactic that you're like, oh, wow, we just had that UNC game. Wait, who are we playing on Tuesday? We're playing going to Florida State? That doesn't mean anything to me anymore. Like, we already did this game. We're already tired. So, yeah, it's something where I don't know why they did it, but it is done. And that's how the schedule is working this year.
All right, with that, we're going to wrap it up here on the latest edition of the DBR podcast, the schedule edition of the DBR podcast. Hey, speaking of schedule, it is worth noting we're going to be back in your feed very, very soon. Don't get confused. Don't, miss one episode because another episode comes right on top of it. We're going to be hitting your feed again in less than 24 hours in all likelihood, because there's some important intel that we just got about a Duke practice, how players were playing, who was shining brighter than some of the others. A very, very smart observer of college basketball sat in on a Duke practice and gave us his projected starting five. He told us a surprising player that he thinks is, going to open some eyes, who you probably are not projecting to have a big role for Duke. All that stuff's going to be coming at you folks in, we're going to have a podcast on it very, very soon.
I will give people a tease. We are not discussing either of our dribbling skills for the Dribble for Victory over Cancer. We will not be discussing that tomorrow. It's going to be actual basketball news. But I will say thank you to everybody, and Jason will echo, thank you to everybody who has donated so far. Continue to donate for the Dribble for Victory over Cancer. That is in a couple of weeks. Again, Jason will be there representing for us, so you'll get to meet him. And then also tinyurl.com/Duke Dribble, capital D in Duke, capital D in Dribble. Hit the link and donate today.
Exactly. Thank you so much for reminding folks about that, Donald. With that, I'm Jason. He is Donald. This is the Duke Band. The plan is out and taking us home. Donald, I have to tell you, dude, I saw a movie last night. I can't even tell you how good it was. I know that you are not a parent, but this movie is so mandatory, so great for parents to see, and it's so good that I think even non-parents will love it as well. It's called The Wild Robot. Mm-hmm. It's this have you heard of this? It's this animated film.
No.
It's from DreamWorks Animation, the same director who did How to Train Your Dragon and several other really good DreamWorks animation films. It's about a robot that in the future that sort of crash lands on this island full of animals, and he ends up the robot's a female voice. She ends up like adopting this little duckling. I'm telling you, Donald, this thing is like WALL-E combined with the Iron Giant. It is one of the 5 best animated films I've ever seen in my life. It's beautiful. It's a work of art. Like every single, how sometimes with animation, they do this thing where they try and make it look really realistic.
Mm-hmm.
This is not that at all. They go for like it's going to look like a painting, and every scene looks like something drawn and incredible works of art. But it is so emotional. It is so funny. I had tears running down my cheeks the entire back half of the movie. It is the surprise movie of the year to me. I'll tell you right now, this is going to get a Best Picture nomination. It is going to be far and away the leading contender to win the Oscar for Best Animated Film. Everyone needs to see this movie. It is so good.
Interesting. I'm not a big animated person, right? Like I watch some animated films, but I'm not a huge animated person. There's obviously some some franchises that I'm cool with, right? Like Toy Story, yeah, Incredibles, yeah, put that on my face. But like some of them I just don't get because there's so many other movies that I haven't yet watched that the animated ones get pushed down. But the funny thing is, Jason, as you mentioned, I am not a parent, but when I do go over my best friend's house and sometimes whatever, animated train that my godson is on, I have seen all those, right? So like when he was big on Cars, I saw Cars every Cars episode, miniseries, little documentary. I've seen all of them, and I love them. They're great. But that's why I kind of keep him down, and I kind of like use him as my guide for the animated train, so that I can get on it, and that way I'm not like, oh yeah, I've already seen those. Sorry, kid. Like, watch that on your own. Like,
I'm telling you, this isn't as good as Toy Story, which is absolute seminal, one of the most important films of the past 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that far behind. And the thing I loved about it was the really great, the early Pixar films, like Toy Story, like The Incredibles, like WALL-E. There are a number of them, that Finding Nemo, where Monsters Inc. I could go on and on. Where kids love it. Kids are howling and in love with it, but adults also see something that they can get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like Pixar has gotten away from that lately. They just haven't been able to find that sweet spot very much. Inside Out 2 a little bit had it. This movie is so squarely in that sweet spot of kids are going to love it, and adults are also just going to be bawling their eyes out at how emotional it is. I'm just telling you, The Wild Robot, you're going to hear from people. It opens on Friday. You're going to hear from people immediately. Go see The Wild Robot. Go see The Wild Robot. I'm telling you right now, go see The Wild Robot.
I will see it whether I go see it or it comes to see me on my TV, because I have a thing that allows me to get movies at an earlier time than other people. So we'll see what happens.
You'll enjoy it. Let me know when you see it, man. I want to hear your reaction.
Will do.